Anacortes Planning Commission. Can we take roll, please? Do we have anyone online of the commissioners?
Do not. Roll has been taken.
So we have 5 here. We have a quorum. We'll proceed. Minutes for May 25th were submitted. Any questions or comments about those? None being heard, those are approved. Mr. Meesemer, any correspondence unrelated to the business today?
Mr. Chair, no correspondence other than that related to items on the agenda.
Then we will proceed to item D, new business, daycare 2 in the R4 use zone as a permitted use. Please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. This evening, I thought I'd give the commissioners and those listening at home an update on where we're at with the daycare 2 in the R4 use zone. As the commissioners remember, I think the City Council adopted a interim ordinance 3091 July 12, 2021, and along with a resolution establishing a work plan. And what that did was allow for daycare 2s in the R4 use zone as a permitted use instead of a conditional use. As you know, the conditional use permit's a type 4 review process, comes before the Planning Commission, goes before the City Council. It can be a long process and it can be an expensive process. And so the idea was to try and facilitate more daycare in Anacortes city limits without putting them through too much pain. So we extended, the City Council extended the interim regulations through Ordinance 4008 in January 10, 2022, then a work plan in February. And unfortunately, we lost one of our planners that was working on the daycare, and since then, we're now looking at it's going to expire July 12, 2022. So we'll be going back to the City Council July 11 to extend those interim regulations once again. Our plan, though, is to also come before the Planning Commission and finish this before the end of August so that we don't have to go back for another extension. So the 2016 Comprehensive Plan, Land Use 6.5, allows for some compatible non-residential uses in residential zones, and that includes various home occupations, parks, senior centers, and daycare centers. While this is a little bit hard to see, there is a map in your packet, and it identifies the R4 use zone, which is half a block off Commercial Avenue, and then up to, looks like L Avenue, I think it is. And it encompasses a fairly significant area. So we did do a survey, and I'll show some of the responses from the survey here in a little bit, but some of the potential impacts that have come up were the drop-off and pickup areas, required parking, which is a director's decision, and oftentimes we have to require a parking study that would then identify actual needs for specific, business. Traffic circulation patterns and what those might be as an impact to a residential neighborhood. Building size in a residential neighborhood, there's currently no maximum building size listed for a daycare. Building design, materials, and articulation and massing are consistent with Chapter 19.63 of the Municipal Code. So we've put together a little bit of draft language, and again, this is also in your packet. And this is what I would like for us to think about and then work forward from. So we would identify that daycare 2 as an allowed use in the R4 use zone and as designated in Table 1941-040 must meet the following criteria: an approved passenger drop-off and pickup area provided adjacent to the site and as approved by the director. Parking must be provided in an amount equal to the number of staff on the largest hourly shift. We've had some conversations with a few of the daycares in town, and what they tell us is that parents are bringing their kids, dropping them off. They're not hanging around. But the staff do need parking areas, and that's where it can be complicated. The facility must meet all licensing requirements consistent with Washington State Department of Children, Youth, and Families licensor, including interior floor space, fencing, and outdoor space. And there are some specific requirements for that. And kind of just throwing a dart at the wall for a maximum building size must not exceed 4,000 square feet. What's interesting about that 4,000 square foot number is that the state requires 35 square foot per child of indoor free space, unencumbered by hallways, bathrooms, desks, things like that. So if you look at that and you say this is maybe a 2,500 square foot after that, it could end up with 71 kids in it. Then the state says, per supervisor, you can only have a certain number of children. So that reduces the number of those children even after that. And so that's something that the commissioners could think about, maximum building size, whether we want to address that or not. And again, some of the state requirements RCW allows for family daycare up to 12 in any residential zone. So we're not looking at trying to regulate those small in-home daycares that don't have any more than 12 children, or adults for that matter. The WAC 110, 303, 54, and that's where it requires the 35 square foot per child in attendance and another 15 if the child is using a crib or a playpen. And then the WAC requires outdoor space of 75 square foot of licensed usable space, must be fenced and have 2 exits. And typically that fence is a minimum of 7 foot. So the upcoming process is we intend to have public meetings to hear from the community. We have a proposed draft code amendment. We'll be doing SEPA here within the next couple of weeks. We're going to advertise for a public hearing in July on the code amendments and then a planning commission recommendation to city council. So this is some of the survey data that we collected. So we launched the survey April 6th and closed it on April 20th at 5. We received 57 responses and we had 11 questions in all. So here, do you rent or own a home? 89% says that they live in a home they own. 10% they're renting. Do you have school-aged children? As many of you know, most of our population are retirees or older like myself, but you know. How many of your children are under the age of 12? Here we had about 12.73%. Said yes. As I said, 76% don't have any children. And do you have a child currently enrolled in daycare? 59% no, but 26% said no children, and then yes, 14%. If yes, how far is the daycare facility from your home? We really wanted to figure out if people are having to go out of town for their daycares. And most of the folks here are under 5 to 10, we have 7%, 7% under 5 miles. And here, what are some of the important factors for choosing your daycare? You know, the level of childcare, 47%, location, 43%, duration, 45%, and outdoor playtime, 47%. What are some of the important factors? Only 7.54 answered other, but you know, safe, licensed, background check, reputation, ability to manage special needs for nutrition, early learning opportunities, certification, safety training, background checks, cost and openings. Most of the daycare businesses that we've spoken with are booked out months and months in advance. Affordability, price, able to handle allergies, so forth. And here they say a stay-at-home mom would be the preference. Do you think the City of Anacortes needs more child care facilities? Overwhelmingly, yes. Would you be opposed to a child care facilities being located in your neighborhood? 70% no. And then we get to what are some of the potential concerns with allowing daycare facilities in residential zoning. And again, we got to that increased traffic, some noise, impact on parking, And there are some minor impacts in what we would, say property values, detract from character, and impact to employment base. And what are some of the potential concerns with allowing daycare facilities in residential zoning here? They had some answering here, and basically we need to see what proposed before commenting. Again, we want to make it clear that if you have not more than 12 kids, there's nothing the city can do to regulate that, and we're not going to. All we do is ask for a business license and a safety inspection. That's really it. A few other things, and I got to tell you, I'm not a fan of surveys. Our previous planner, Emily Morgan, was working on this, and she wanted to see what results would come out of a survey. And like I said, I'm not really a fan of surveys. So most of that information is not going to be moving forward. In fact, probably none of it. I think we already know what the impacts are. It's parking, drop-off areas, and traffic concerns. We've heard a little bit about what noise issues might be if you have a facility that's fairly close to a neighbor and you've got kids playing outdoors. But again, the Washington Administrative Code already has some regulatory measures for noise levels in residential neighborhoods. And so they're not going to be bringing out their stereo and blasting the neighbors out, but you might hear kid noises playing in the playground and stuff like that. So with that, with what you have in your package, you have some draft language that we're going to be working on over the next month and a half to 2 months. I'll be going, as I mentioned, I'll be going to council on July 11 to adopt an ordinance extending the interim regulations for another 6 months. And what we'd like to do is try and get some language before the city council before that 6 months is up, so we don't have to go back and have another interim regulation extended. And I think we can do that. This is really simple. And if the commissioners have some ideas of language that they would like to have us consider as we move into a public hearing, let me know, and we'll start that discussion amongst us and see what we want to move forward. Any questions on my presentation?
Can you put this in comparison to the daycare center we looked at a few months back, the one on D Avenue? For square footage, size, the considerations given to parking, the pickup, drop-off area?
I think we're talking about the Fiddlehead project?
The Samish Indian daycare facility that was going to be on D Avenue, or is on, I'm assuming is going to happen on D Avenue?
Oh, on D Avenue, the Samish
Yep.
Nation project. Yeah, I could bring information on that for you. I don't have that with me today.
Remind me, is that, that's not R4, is it?
No, that's not R4. That's actually in the R2A.
Okay.
And that would be a conditional use permit. So we're not looking at changing any of the other zones, just the R4 to make it allowed.
I mean, it might be interesting to compare, the considerations given to that project to a project in an R4 zone, from size, some of the other consideration, being able to scale the number of children that you would be considering. Are we looking at a smaller sized facility because of the neighborhood it's going to be in now, and keep the size of the facility more closely resembling the homes in that area so it doesn't look like it stands out? I mean, I don't know if those are some of the things that we would be looking at.
Sure.
And I agree with you. It's kind of hard connecting the dots with a survey where, the majority of the folks don't have children, but they all seem to answer some of the questions that would be more,
I'm inclined to throw that out,
Yep.
And just go. I can definitely bring information to the Planning Commission in comparison with the Samish daycare. Fiddlehead project, which is up on R and about 34th, I think. They just expanded their Montessori school and childcare. So those two, and then the other one would be the Anacortes Family Center. They just got started on their project that would have a daycare on the lower floor. It's, I think, in the R4 use zone as well. It's about 4,000 square feet, and they're only going to have 40 kids But I'll bring some comparisons for you folks.
So given that this is in the R4 zone, the scope of buildings in that area is likely to be fairly large anyway. If somebody's building an apartment building in an R4 zone. I don't know of any daycares that are done on multiple floors, to my knowledge. So they would be either a single floor of a multi-story building or a single-story building on a larger lot. That seems to make the most sense.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, yeah, that's correct. You probably won't see a multi-story daycare or a daycare on a second or third floor. The state guidelines basically are so prohibitive, it just won't happen.
Yeah, it's been a bunch of years since I supervised a daycare licensor, so I wouldn't trust my memory about the rules, but I do know that they're very specific about the number of children, the number of staff, the staff ratio, and it's partly based on the ages of the kids and things like that. But do you have any sense for if some rules are written for this and somebody comes along with a plan that requires some kind of variation, is that going to trigger a conditional use permit? Or is that even possible if we make these changes?
So typically what would happen if somebody came along and they said, well, we want to do something different than what your guidelines, the city guidelines, are telling us, that would require a variance. And variances are tough to get. And typically variances are only allowed for height, setbacks, things like that. Not for, and these are mostly design standards, square footage and things like that. So
in other words, the applicants are going to be pretty much stuck with whatever we come up with.
Correct.
With that, I'm sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, with that being said, are these best practices that we're considering as well for the size and scope of a daycare center in an R4 zone, so that we are kind of providing enough, flexibility for a developer to want to come in or a business owner to want to come in, knowing that they would be able to, be profitable with the size and scale that we were proposing?
Right. And I've had a couple of conversations with, for instance, the Fiddlehead School, Kelly Linneman, and, their building sizes are actually less than that 4,000 square feet. And they seem to be making a good go of it. And she's not concerned about that. The building size, again, is throwing a dart at a wall. And, if you all could do a little research from your end, I'll do some more on my end. The whole idea on limiting building size, which may not be necessary, but the thought came up of what if we had a nationwide conglomerate that wanted to come in and build a daycare of 15,000 square feet in the R4 use zone. That would be a huge impact in a residential zone. Would that ever happen? I don't know. But that was what was brought forward to me. So I just threw that 4,000 square foot out there. And even at that could end up with 71 children. That's quite a few kids.
Mr. Minister, one of the regulations, B, states that your parking is going to be equal to the largest hourly staffing. And the question I have is, there's no accommodation for people arriving by transit, or if it's on a transit line with a transit bus stop close at hand. If I have to have 8 spaces on site, that's a lot of spaces, and that's probably more impacting than the kids are to the neighbors. So is there some way of reducing that parking requirement if there's a transit program involved?
I think that's a great idea. And we could add something like that into the regs.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Musimer. 2 questions. The first question is, it pertains to the square foot requirement that you mentioned per child.
I'm sorry, could you repeat?
I'm sorry, it pertains to the square foot requirement per child. Would that also apply for an adult daycare center?
My understanding is yes.
And then the second question is, are there any considerations to business hours that you would be looking at for these?
I'm sorry, one more time?
Are there any considerations for business hours, hours of operation?
So the state allows you to operate, I think it's 12 hours a day. I'll confirm that with the state. And we hadn't thought of actually limiting the hours, but that's something that could be considered. I've seen regulations in other jurisdictions where they limit the hours for the
Yeah, I
larger.
could anticipate a need, whether you're a nurse or you're in the military, you work at the refinery, you work shift work. There may be a desire to have more hours available, but I could also see that coming in conflict with the neighbors.
Yeah.
Ms. Ruther?
I remember when I was looking at I think it was the Sammamish daycare, they were saying they had space requirements for outdoor space. So was there any thought of, does that need to be, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to put regulations on that we don't need, but it was just a thought of, do we need to have any limits or requirements for that?
So the state actually regulates the outdoor space.
Oh, they do, okay.
Yeah. And I think it's 75 square foot per kid, but might be less.
That might be more of a limiting factor than the size of the building then, because, you know, you could get a 2-story building to be 4,000 square feet easily, but if you have that many kids and you need 75 square feet of outdoor space, that might be more the limiting factor.
I
Just a
think
thought.
I think you're correct. The limiting, the outdoor space is 75 square feet, and then 15 for inside. Or excuse me, 35, and then another 15 if they're using a crib. So I think that outdoor space is 75 square feet. When you think about that, 10 kids, 750 square feet. So yeah, you get, you're looking at 1,500 square feet plus, and you get, 20 kids, and that's a lot.
So I had just a comment about the wording for the pickup and drop off and noise issues. In the past couple of requests we've reviewed, the language seemed a little twisted and not very clear. I think there was a lot of room for assumptions or judgment to be made. Not that I object to that, but I think that if we could take a look at that language and try to make it as clear and specific as possible, how do you determine if the pickup and drop-off issue is a problem or not, and what constitutes a problem? Is it just because one neighbor complains and because they don't like kids, or is it because it's causing problems for a whole neighborhood? And I think some guidance there would be helpful.
Okay.
I have a thought, this is just like when you have to permit a Starbucks or whatever, you probably have to have a queue length for the number of people you think are going to buy coffees. I mean, it seems kind of relevant in terms of pickup for kids. How many kids are you going to have half-day programs, maybe some tie to that queue for parents to pick up and drop off to the number of kids? That's just a thought.
And that's a great idea. You're right, for Starbucks, they have a queue lane that, basically they back up. I think it's like a 4-car, back up, although Starbucks is more like 10 right now.
Gretzky.
I did a little math using a 4,000 square foot building and 75 feet per child. You get 35 plus 15 for infants and cribs and whatever, so that's 50. But you have bathrooms and hallways and prep areas and stuff like that. So that basically would probably reasonably allow 53 kids in that facility. But then using your calculation for the exterior space, you need another 4,000 feet for playground space. So you're up to 8,000 feet with the building and the playground space and nothing dedicated for the parking. So it's not going to take your standard residential lot. It's going to take something larger, 10,000, 11,000 foot lot to build a 4,000 square foot building, if they want to keep 50 kids there. Now, they may have a 4,000 square foot building and have to scale back the number of kids in order to get the square footage requirements, interior and exterior.
Right.
Again, that's the assumption of 75 feet for interior space per child. And that may be conservative and too high a number, but again, just kind of playing with some numbers.
Yeah.
Mr. Curtis?
Do we happen to, I don't remember off the top of my head, do we remember what the enrollment at the Montessori school was that we discussed a few weeks ago? Because I think that model might be instructive.
I don't.
Okay.
I understand you're going to put together a table for us?
I'm sorry, one more time?
A table of the different facilities that we've looked at recently, the D Street
Yeah,
and
we
the
can,
R Street,
yeah, I can bring something forward.
and the population of those as well?
Yep.
Okay, excellent, excellent.
All right, commissioners, have any other questions? Mr. Meismer, thank you very much for the presentation. Okay.
If a church wants to open up a daycare, a couple of them in town do, will they, I mean, their buildings are pretty large, they typically have large parking lots and areas they can dedicate to playgrounds, so they still have to come in for, get permits to if they want to remodel or open up a new preschool in a church facility?
So let's say right now, and if I understand you correctly, that we have somebody with a building and they want to renovate it and open up a daycare,
Yeah.
a daycare too, then they're going to have to come in and get permits. And right now, that would be an allowed use. And we would have to have them go through a parking study and all kinds of things. One of the things that we've noticed from a staff perspective is if you're going to build a new daycare, and I'm going to use the Fiddlehead as an example, and that's off of our avenue. I think it's right around 34th, maybe now 30th. Anyway, they had to construct street improvements, curb, gutter, sidewalk, widen the street, and put parking in. That's quite a bit, and storm drainage, because every time you widen the street, now you've got storm drainage. So they've got some pretty significant fees just in that. And so, you know, as we're thinking about this, if we tell someone, okay, well, you're going to need to do a drop-off zone with a queue that's going to be 80 foot long or more, that continues to increase the costs for those daycares to a prohibitive state in some cases. And I don't know how to really address that, because we want to address neighborhood concerns. We want to make sure that we have a drop-off area, but we also want to try and balance that act in some way. So, and again, you know, if somebody comes in, they want to build, they want to open up a daycare, they're going to go through a permitting process. They're going to go through traffic reports that can be thousands of dollars. Then they're going to be constructing parking on site based on what they bring us from the traffic study on the parking count that they're going to need. And typically that is based on their staffing levels. With the Fiddlehead School, they were able to, I'm going to call it stack park, because the only people that are using the parking lot are their staff. So they can stack them one behind the other. And that's a very good utilization of square footage of property. And then working with the state, which is something I hadn't actually known before, but you can stagger times that the kids are out in the open space outside. So instead of requiring 4,000 square feet, you might have 2,000, and you have half the kids out at one time and then half the kids out at another time. And apparently that works.
I'm just thinking to myself here, it's not rocket science, right? It's daycare science. And, you know, there's got to be some childcare math out there that, you know, one of you retired individuals here could Google perhaps. But, you know, I think what's going to end up happening here, right, is you're going to have to take the lot size, and you're going to have to go from the lot size and then take into account, well, if it's 35 per child, how big the building's going to be, 75 times the required playground, you know, my staff, the number of parking spots, and that's basically going to determine how big my building is going to be. That then says how many kids I can actually take on and whether it ends up being profitable. So, I mean, this is going to be an interesting, if we're not careful, right? I think it's going to be kind of an interesting project, if you will. And I look forward to whatever you guys come up with.
Me too.
Yeah.
And of
Well,
course,
I would assume that somebody who's proposing to open a daycare is going to run those numbers and
One last
be
follow-up.
privy to them. Mr. Curtis?
Yeah, one more follow-up. The distinction between adolescent child daycare and adult daycare, because we're talking about both. Does the adult daycare also have the outdoor square footage requirement?
I'm not absolutely certain. I'll do some more research on that and find out for you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you very much. We have a lot to think about, and we'll look forward to seeing your draft materials.
So I will mention that we have been fortunate to bring on another planning staff member. Grace Pollard is working for us now as a senior planner, and I think you'll be hearing from Grace more on daycare uses. Thank you.
With that, we will bring the meeting to a close. Thank you, everybody.